Hi everyone, this is Dr. Phil here, and we are here in France at Versailles, the Palace of Versailles, located just outside of the city center of Paris. Versailles is not part of Paris per se. You have to take a train, about 30-minute train ride out here. If you're ever in Paris, you take the RER-C, is a direct route out to Versailles. Anyway, Versailles was a palace. It was built on a hunting lodge by Louis XIV, who you might argue is the greatest king of them all. This was, of course, the residence not only for Louis XIV, but of course also Louis XV, as well as Louis XVI. And of course, Louis XVI was infamously beheaded during the French Revolution, along with his wife Marie Antoinette, at the beginning of the Terror and the Great Terror during the convention phase of the French Revolution. I will say, before I talk about a couple more things with history, I'd love to do this video inside, but there's so many people inside, it's just not really feasible, and the inside is massive, and if you come here, or in the future, hopefully I'll be able to do some study abroads, maybe I can bring some students here in the future, but the inside is tremendous, particularly the Hall of Mirrors, the chambers of the king. It is incredible. Really goes, it's indescribable, and a photo really can't do it justice either. But here we are outside. So Versailles is symbolic of a lot of things. First of all, as we look at Versailles, it's a magnificent palace. This became the center of government when Louis XIV moved the government here. Before this, the center of government was actually what we know as the Louvre in Paris. The museum, which is also tremendous, that was the old center of government. Louis XIV, when he became king in the 1600s, moved it to this palace that he constructed, this tremendous palace here. And this palace also was the home at one point to the Mona Lisa, which of course was moved to the Louvre by Louis XV. This is the epitome, the symbol of absolute monarchy in Europe, and it's also a symbol of really the long-term effects of the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation fractured the authority of the Catholic Church, and it gave rise to new interpretations of national government. It gave interpretation to, if you take, for example, the Dutch Republic, it gave rise to parliamentary monarchies in England. It also gave rise to absolute monarchy in France, as well as interpretations elsewhere. But particularly this, with Louis XIV, particularly is the essence of absolute monarchy, in a reaction to the fracturing of the Catholic Church following the Protestant Reformation. This is also really the essence of what revolutionaries during the revolutionary age of the 18th century and also into the 19th century, this type of thing is what they were opposing. Absolute birthright monarchs, classes above the rest of the population, highly privileged. And during the French Revolution, which began in 1789, which overthrew the king, Louis XVI, of course, there were aspects of this palace that were damaged by the revolution, as the revolution came here and associated this with the extreme wealth of the aristocracy. Louis XVI's wife, Marie Antoinette, was actually called Madame Deficit during the period leading up to the revolution. Now, the revolution was caused by a number of factors, but probably most significant was an economic crisis in the country. The country was significantly indebted, partially due to the failed policies of Louis XV, but also because of the costly wars that the French involved themselves in. The French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, and also coupled with that, really a failure in having a reasonable tax policy. Those wars were all paid for on credit, on debt, and there was no policy in place of taxing the entire strata of society, and so the masses of people in the so-called Third Estate bore the entire brunt of the tax burden. And this ultimately created a financial crisis that Louis XVI was unable to avert in 1789, which gave rise to the French Revolution. And of course, shortly after it began, in the spring and summer of 1789, the revolutionaries, of course, formed the Tennis Court Oath, and we have the creation of the French rights of man and citizen. Interestingly, too, before I finish up here, because I'll just keep talking forever here, um, but interestingly, this is also the site where, in October of 1789, a mob of French women left Paris and came to the palace here and effectively demanded that the king, his wife, return to Paris and live in Paris amongst the people. And it was this act that really symbolized the essence of what the Revolutionary Age was about, and that was the will of the people. The idea that the governed should have a government that represents and listens to the will of the people, rather than absolute monarchs that live in this world above everyday people and live on and rule on the basis of birthright. Instead, this idea was that government should represent the people. And that is a fundamental catalyst, an important change in history that, of course, really embodies the ideal archetype for governments today. And so critical moment of the French Revolution playing out here at Versailles. And of course, it's also here in Versailles where the infamous, or famous, I suppose, depending on how you look at it, the famous peace conferences were held at the end of World War I. Most notably, of course, the peace conference that resulted in the end of the war with Germany. And of course, for many historians of World War II, that has become an infamous treaty, oftentimes, and probably to some degree unfairly, oftentimes placing blame on that treaty for the emergence of the Nazis and the Second World War, which in part may be true, but I think it's often overstated. So the Palace of Versailles, constructed by Louis XIV.